Hello and welcome. You're watching Biz First Review 360. I'm Jitendra Gunasena. Early in the week, the International Monetary Fund warned Sri Lanka that government inaction on key policy issues and deteriorating external environment may risk the country's economic outlook. The IMF has already approved a 3-year $1.5 billion loan to help support Sri Lanka's economic reforms. But how is Sri Lanka adjusting under this facility? Let's take a look.
The International Monetary Fund's Executive Board said in its Article 4 consultation report that despite positive growth momentum, Sri Lanka's economy is facing challenges due to the difficult external environment and a period of significant political transition. Sri Lanka's finances are in a dire state owing to high external debt triggered by excessive borrowing for infrastructure development. Sri Lanka is also heavily burdened with a balance of payment crisis. Under the IMF program, the government is urged to reform taxes aimed at boosting government revenue, reduce fiscal deficit, and improve foreign exchange reserves.
To be perfectly frank, the cost of inaction is relatively high. Sri Lanka needs to do a fundamental reboot of macroeconomic policies, or I think the current jargon is a policy upgrade, is used here. There's been, it's fair to say, policy drift now for some time in terms of macroeconomic policies and a lack of clarity as to where things are going. Not firmly embarking on a path of fiscal consolidation, not moving on state enterprise reform, not allowing the exchange rate to adjust, and not being clear both, with the external markets and domestic investors as to where macroeconomic policies are going.
We asked two economists how they see Sri Lanka adjusting under the IMF program.
Over the last several months, the business community had been very concerned about the uncertainty on tax policies and the overall fiscal environment of the country. So we're very hopeful that with the country now under an IMF program and some of the areas that the program is due to tackle will really help put Sri Lanka on a stronger fiscal footing, bring in a bit more predictability on tax policy and so on. Of course, there will be an adjustment phase that will be no doubt tricky for people and for businesses, but in the longer term, these may be short-term costs that we have to bear for longer-term prospects. Another thing that we are, as in the Ceylon Chamber and in the broader private sector, we are quite hopeful about is that part of this program will be to revamp the tax code, update our tax laws, and make it more business-friendly. And those are certainly areas that have been pending for a long time. With the IMF program, we are likely to also see a fair amount of other external funding from other development agencies, bilateral lenders, as well as international capital markets, and the sort of the vote of confidence that this gives to then attract more capital to strengthen our external balance.
The IMF agreement provides a list of benchmarks, in particular indicative targets for things like reserves and how much it should be built up in the program as well. So these things will be reviewed quarterly and adjusted, I think, accordingly. So those are sort of like indicative targets that Sri Lanka will need to meet. In addition to that, I think the harder part is on the reform side, where there's a lot of structural benchmarks with timelines as well given. So it'll be interesting to see when these things come up for review, how the progress has been. So and therefore policy clarity and also getting some of these things done will need to be looked at. And a key risk that they've highlighted, the IMF has highlighted as well, is that of policy inaction. Therefore, these things need to be looked at when the program will go on.
Now, more on borrowings. Turkey's Exim Bank is to allocate a credit line of $350 million to Sri Lanka under a memorandum of understanding to enhance the financial cooperation between the two countries.
Foreign Minister Mangala Samaravira said that Exim Bank, Turkey's main export credit agency, is to extend a $350 million loan to Sri Lanka under a deal that is to be signed between Sri Lanka and Turkey. The announcement followed a bilateral meeting with the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu. The credit facility is aimed at enhancing relations through financial cooperation.
The view to further enhancing and intensifying relations through financial cooperation, a MOU between Sri Lanka and Turkey will be signed in the near future. Under this MOU, Turkish Exim Bank will allocate a credit line to the amount of $350 to the Sri Lankan government. I'm confident that the regular high-level interactions at all levels will certainly pave the way for a stronger relationship between Turkey and Sri Lanka.
The two foreign ministers have also discussed possibilities of furthering economic cooperation to boost trade.
And we agreed that we can further develop our economic relations. We also decided to increase our cooperation in the fields of energy, security, culture, tourism, agriculture, education and health.
Now for Biz First Briefing, a segment that features some of the other stories that made headlines. Westminster House, Colombo celebrates Queen's birthday. That's coming up right after the break. Welcome back. You're watching Biz First Review 360. The British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, His Excellency James Doris, hosting a Queen's birthday party at Westminster House, Colombo, commented on the relations between Sri Lanka and the United Kingdom.
The Westminster House in Colombo was full of festive cheer as the British High Commission celebrated Her Majesty the Queen's 90th birthday with parliamentarians, businessmen, religious leaders and representatives of the international community and civil society in attendance. Queen Elizabeth II has been the sovereign of the United Kingdom for more than 64 years and the longest-serving monarch in British history. Addressing the gathering, High Commissioner His Excellency James Doris said the UK will continue to work towards strengthening democratic values and institutions and facilitate reconciliation, truth and accountability.
We are proud of the support that we are giving. Some of this is direct. For example, the demining work we are supporting in the north, work we are doing with the police on community training, community policing and training, expertise that we have been sharing with agencies leading the fight against corruption. We were very pleased that President Sirisena chose to travel to London last month to represent Sri Lanka in the International Anti-Corruption Seminar organised by our Prime Minister, David Cameron. And much of the support that we are giving, some $50 million a year, is indirect. Through partner organisations we help to finance, a number of whom are represented here this evening. We congratulate the government and all those who have had a part in achieving all that has been achieved over the past year. We know too how much more needs to be done. We know that getting this right and winning nationwide public support and maintaining confidence will need sustained and determined leadership. We will continue to give our support.
India, one of the fastest growing economies of the world, urged the Sri Lankan business community to take advantage of its close proximity and its booming economy.
Delivering the keynote address on India-Sri Lanka relations in the 21st century, organised by the Bandaranaike Centre for International Studies, the Indian High Commissioner, His Excellency Y.K. Singh, has said bilateral ties have become robust since President Maithripala Sirisena took office. Singh has said engagements between the two neighbours across the Pork Strait have entered a new phase with opportunities for economic activity opening up.
Sri Lanka is an integral part, in fact I would say even at the heart of Prime Minister Modi's Neighbourhood First policy. The Neighbourhood First policy recognises that India's growth is linked to the prosperity of its neighbourhood and that the neighbours have a first claim on India's progress. Prime Minister Modi has a vision of a neighbourhood where great investment ideas and people move seamlessly across borders, and India will continue to work toward this lofty vision of promoting greater connectivity amongst our countries. A key element of this vision is strengthening bilateral ties with Sri Lanka and indeed other SAARC countries. Economic ties are at the core of India's renewed engagement with the world. Under our Prime Minister, there has been an intense focus on investments and growth, which is already paying dividends in the 2 years that this government has been in power.
Singh urged the Sri Lankan business community to tap the $2 trillion economy to enhance trade and investment between the two countries.
With FDI of $40 billion from April last year to March this year, India has emerged as a magnet for global investments, and this trend is accelerating. Just this month, the Amazon chief executive, Jeff Bezos, announced that his company will invest an additional $3 billion in India, boosting its committed investment in the country to over $5 billion. Driven by these and other large investments, India's e-commerce business is estimated to increase to $119 billion by 2020. Thanks to these investments, the Indian GDP is expanding rapidly at a healthy rate of 7.6% per annum, making India the fastest growing major economy in the world. The latest estimates indicate that this financial year, which is April to March, India's economic growth may cross the 8% mark this fiscal year. This should be very welcome news for neighboring economies such as Sri Lanka. We hope that the Sri Lankan businesses will take advantage of their proximity to India.
Environment lawyer urged greater action against illegal wildlife trade.
Environmentalist Jagat Gudawadara warns that illegal trade in wildlife has risen to alarming levels and urged the attention of authorities to combat it.
Because when it comes to Sri Lanka, ivory trade is not a big issue. Of course, it's African ivory that is very much in the trade. But we have certain species which had been driven almost to the brink of extinction due to unauthorized collection of specimens. So Vallavatta is one which has become a hot item in the illegal wildlife trade, but hardly any mention. Then comes the other issues like the export of seashells illegally. I should not mention the name illegally all the time. All these things that I mention are illegal things. Then the export of bird's nest, the exports of corals and aquatic and marine organisms. So these things are hardly mentioned. Another dimension is the export of plants. Plants which are endemic to Sri Lanka are always under threat. The Kirita Muni, now it's called the Henkelia. 3 species of Henkelia which are legally protected had been exported, and even a hybrid had been made and registered as a new variety. But they are hardly reported, hardly talked about, hardly mentioned.
Environmentalists also said Sri Lanka is being used by illegal wildlife traders operating between Africa and the East Asia region as a point of operations. The recent detection and seizure of blood ivory and rosewood by customs indicates that Sri Lanka has become a transit point in the trade. Gunawardana says illegal imports of aquatic plants are also on the rise.
Now when it comes to illegal imports, it is an issue that is most of the time ignored. I will give you one example. Go to a place like Diyatuyana. There will be aquatic plants imported from other countries. But if you look at the regulations, under the Plant Protection Act, no aquatic plant can be imported to Sri Lanka under regulations made far back in 1981. But the plants are imported, openly sold, and some of them have escaped into the wilds and are starting to become invasive species in the wilds.
Environmentalists say there is no concerted effort to protect species endemic to Sri Lanka from illegal wildlife traders.
We have to get out of the usual rut of looking at only the hunters and the bushmeat trade to see the wider dimensions which are threatening the existence of several species, or rather a large number of species endemic to Sri Lanka.
Where do we stand in terms of trade and investment with India? That's coming up right after the break. Welcome back. You're watching BizFirst Review 360. In our special segment, Speak Your Mind, economist Deshal Dimal talks about trade and investment between Sri Lanka and India.
Now, I think overall Sri Lanka should look at positioning itself in terms of an economic diplomacy perspective. Sri Lanka, I believe, should position itself as a hub for trade within the Indian Ocean region, not just within the Indian subcontinent, but within the Indian Ocean. We should take advantage of the fact that we are the central point between West Asia and East Asia, the most dynamic global growth regions in the world, and we are right in the middle of this. So that creates a massive opportunity, which I don't think we are doing enough to take advantage of. So that positioning is going to be important, and how we strategize that as well. Now, if we look at, so as I said earlier, FDI, foreign direct investment, is a very crucial aspect of building trade relations as well. If you look at Sri Lanka's recent history of FDI in the last, say, 1.5 decades, it has been dominated in the domestic services sector. It's mostly been in telecommunications, so companies like Dialog, companies like Etisalat, all foreign telecom companies coming into Sri Lanka, real estate, construction, and that kind of sector, which is very much focused on the on the local economy. Whereas we have seen very little export-oriented manufacturing or export-oriented agriculture as foreign investment. And those are the kind of investments that we need to attract in order to build out trade markets. Those are the investments that are going to create our growth opportunities to create more jobs going forward. But we have failed to do that. I think the reason is in terms of promoting FDI also, we've generally taken a fairly passive approach. The BOI is an institution that has a lot of very capable people, but we haven't, the policy direction has been more in terms of waiting for investors to come to us. Whereas for a country like Sri Lanka, that approach won't work. We need to proactively go to countries. So for example, if you look at, say, a German manufacturer who is exporting into India, we should probably be able to go to him and say, look, if you export from Sri Lanka, your lead time will be much shorter, your logistical cost will be less, your transportation cost will be less, we have such natural resources that will be useful for your thing, and proactively go to guys and convince them to come and set up here. That is how countries like Singapore, countries like Malaysia have been effective in attracting investment. Now we know that in terms of infrastructure, Sri Lanka has very big needs in terms of developing infrastructure, and China has played a very big role in contributing to that in recent years, with mixed results admittedly. But I think one way that India could play a big role there is going forward, the policy of this government appears to be more in terms of public-private partnerships for the development of infrastructure. I think that is one area where Indian investment could become very useful to this. And again, Sri Lanka should not look at just individual countries, but look at more kind of open multilateral ways of approaching it in a kind of transparent, rules-based framework. But I think that is one area where, again, that investment relation between the two countries can become quite significant going forward. I was telling you earlier about the midpoint, Sri Lanka being the midpoint between East Asia and West Asia. The logistical advantage there is fantastic. We have equal access to both the coasts of India in terms of the West Coast and the East Coast. There are so many companies around the world who would love to have their logistical warehousing or warehousing, storage, freight forwarding operations based out of a location like Sri Lanka. And we also have the regulatory framework to do that. There's a Commercial Hub Regulation Act of 2013 that creates opportunities for multi-country consolidation, entrepot trade, and a number of other opportunities like that. But we just haven't done the kind of work to promote that and to attract companies to come here and make use of that. And that again is automatically going to create a significant improvement in Sri Lanka's trade and investment relations with India as well. I think that would create a very good, if the government is able to develop that in terms of a key objective of foreign policy, to build up the capacity of the commercial officers in our embassies in countries like India, I think that has got a very big role in terms of, again, enhancing trade also. Going forward, how should trade evolve? Again, like if you look at Sri Lanka's trade, we are mainly focusing on end products, on goods. Whereas going forward, we need to move across the value chain as well. So instead of just producing a piece of apparel, we can move backwards on the value chain by going into things like the design aspect of it, the product development part of it, and therefore those areas have a lot more value than just the manufacturing stage. And moving forward as well, on the forward end of the value chain, you have things like the branding, the packaging, and so on also. So we need to move along that value chain as well, and therefore within that single product line, you can create a lot more value, and that's automatically going to create opportunities on the trade side. But this is not to say that there aren't challenges. Already Sri Lanka exports quite a bit into India, and many companies that export into India will tell you that it's not an easy thing to do at all. There are huge issues, particularly in terms of recognition of standards. Very often when you send your product into India, it will be held back at customs, and there will be issues in terms of not recognizing the Sri Lankan standards that are given. There will be delays. Often if you're exporting, say, a vegetable product or a food product, it's going to get, it won't even survive its expiry date. So these issues are certainly there on the ground, and oftentimes what you hear anecdotally is that the policy directions that come from the national level often do not translate down to the actual implementation level at, say, the customs office and so on. So I think this is something that the Indian government also needs to take on in a more proactive way, because if you look at, say, competing with China in terms of sphere of influence in the geopolitical sphere of influence within Sri Lanka, China has a very big influence in Sri Lanka in terms of government-to-government dealings, in terms of the might of investment in infrastructure and so on. India can really supersede that with regard to private trade. Already there's a big advantage. Sri Lanka's bilateral trade with China is about, Sri Lanka exports about $180–200 million worth of goods to China. It's more than 3 times that to India. So all the advantages is there. But if Indian government can proactively facilitate trade issues, I think that will be a big advantage in terms of boosting economic relations between the two countries and giving a leg up for India, particularly over China, in terms of economic relations. If you look at the SEPA agreement that began negotiations back in 2004-2005, with regard to trade and services, it's not a case of just opening up and just liberalizing everything in one go. What happens is the two countries will request from each other which sectors that they would want to see liberalized, and then a country like Sri Lanka, the liberalizing country, has the entire freedom to choose what it wants to liberalize and what it wants to restrict. So it's just so I would see it as not opening up, but a way of regulating trade between two entities with a view to creating greater competitiveness and greater integration. And I think that has really been misconceived to a great extent, and I think it's no thanks to the successive governments, unfortunately, of not being open and not being transparent in the way that the agreement has been dealt with. There's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of lack of knowledge, and I think it's expected that there would be a lot of fear and apprehension with regard to what this could entail.
And well, that's all the news we have for you for tonight. You can also look us up on our Facebook page, BizFirst Review 360. Enjoy the weekend and join us next Friday at the same time. I'm Jitendra Gunasena. Good night.